Okay. Nancy, I have questions for you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your writing schedule. Um, I guess the first one is, how do you know when a story's done?
That can be a difficult question. There are writers I know, like Ted Chiang, who write the last sentence first. And he says he can't begin a story unless he knows where it's going and what the last sentence will be. I could no more do this than fly. Well, because I'm a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants rather than plotting ahead of time or outlining. So for me, the story has to come together. All the elements have to come together so that I can see the ending when I'm about halfway to two-thirds of the way through. If that doesn't happen, then I know that I'm not going to be able to finish the story. But if it does happen, I end up with a rough draft. And then I go over it two or three more times. And then my husband reads it, and then I take his advice and go over it one more time. So it's done when all of that entire process is done.
Okay, I guess that would keep you from making endless and endless revisions.
Yes.
Great. What advice would you give your younger writer self? And also, I suppose, since we're going to have probably a few kids maybe looking at this, if there were kids that wanted to start a writing career, what would you tell them as well?
Well, there's two different answers I can give to this question. The cynical answer is that if I were going to start my writing career again, I would have written Beggars in Spain first, and then I would have written a lot more books that were like Beggars in Spain so that I built a brand, and it would make me a lot richer than I am now. This isn't what I did. What I did was write whatever seized my interest and imagination at the time that it seized it. Some of them were space operas, some of them were thrillers, some of them were extremely depressing cautionary tales, some of them were much more upbeat. And as a result, I'm all over the map with the kind of science fiction that I offer. And although this has been very satisfying personally, it's been less lucrative. If I were to do it over again, I'd probably do the exact same thing because I have to be really interested in a topic or a character or a story before I write it. And that's probably what happened. For anybody, kids or otherwise, that are starting a writing career and want to do this, the advice is very classic and it's two-part. Read and read and read and write and write and write. You get better by doing it, not by talking about it, by reading books about it, by listening to interviews about it, but by doing it.
Great. All right. How deep do you go when doing your scientific research? I guess the question is that sometimes you can get ideas from reading something in a scientific journal or study, or do you have an idea and then do the research? And then what happens when you find a contradictory viewpoint? Do you build that in as a plot point that there are two different approaches to that piece of science, or do you just stop researching and start writing at that point?
A lot depends on the kind of story that I'm writing. If I'm writing a really hard SF story that deals with science, simply extrapolates it, and then I come across a different point of view. If it is something so esoteric like string theory, about which everybody has a point of view, none of which to match, then I'll just go with whatever one seems most convenient. If, on the other hand, I run up against something that is going to derail the plot, then I have two choices. I can either build it in as saying, well, another character thinks this, and then prove them fictionally wrong, or I can actually go with the other point of view. It really depends on how the story is going to unfold. When I wrote Beggars in Spain, I put in 3 or 4 different theories about why we sleep. And then I said, well, some people think this, some people think that, some people think this other. This is what I'm using for this story. And I went along with that. It has since, incidentally, been totally debunked by new sleep research. But there's nothing I can do about that since I wrote this thing 20 years ago.
Yeah. Um, of all of your stories, which ones come back to mind most often? Or when you're done writing something, are you just on to the next one because there's only so much space in your brain?
I'm really on to the next one because that's where my enthusiasm and passion lay at that moment. So when the copy edited manuscript comes in, or the galleys for something I wrote 6 months or a year or 2 years ago, I really groan. I regard it as a chore to go over this stuff. And I never reread my own fiction after it's in print, unless I have to do it at a reading, or unless somebody wants a sequel and I have to read it to find out what I wrote. But I only work on one piece at a time, and I'm passionate about it. I know writers who work on as many as 6 different pieces at a time, and when they get stuck, they go to another one. To me, this would feel a little bit like adultery. I'm faithful to this piece of fiction while I'm working on it.
Well, then, along those lines,
It's
we had a question about For Beggars in Spain. So you had that as the novella in Asimov's, and I think actually that was the first piece I read of yours. I remember sitting on my parents' porch reading that. So what was it like to go back and expand it, and not only to a full length, but then to add 3 more books, 2 more?
I had felt that the story was not finished when the novella was finished. I wanted to carry forward what would happen next to those characters. So the first novel takes the novella as the first quarter of the book and then carries this forward chronologically. It isn't an expansion, it's a sequential carrying forward of the same characters in the same story. Then when it was finished, I decided I did want to write another one, but I didn't want to use the main characters from the first book as the main characters. They're there, but they're more in the background, and a different set of characters come through. And the same is done with the third one. The third one, I don't think is quite as, and perhaps I wouldn't have done it had my publisher not wanted me to. But the second one, I definitely wanted to because I felt the story wasn't done.
So at that point, it was possibly more the issues in the plot, even if you were on a different set of characters, that was where you were still interested.
It was the society, and it was the idea of sleeplessness hadn't yet been completely worked through in a way that I was happy with.
Okay, that makes sense. So your books very often look at future technology and then sort of twist it, and it's sometimes about the technology, but like with the Sleepless, what happens after that technology is available? Are there bits of future research or current research for the future that have caught your interest now?
Yes, right now I'm very interested in an apprehensive sort of way in the fact that we are way overdue coming plague. And if it's bacterial, we have no antibiotics that are not drug resistant to something. And this does worry me a lot. There's a new one coming out, Teixobactin, but it's only just in the initial stages, that promises to attack bacteria in their cell wall rather than in their internal machinery, which will make it more difficult for them to mutate and be around. But I don't know how long it'll be before this is available. And part of the reason we don't have enough antibiotics that still work is the drug companies don't want to develop them because by the time they go through all the clinical trials, drug resistance is already developed. This has gone way back to the beginning. Alexander Fleming introduced penicillin in 1943. By 1945, some strains of bacteria had developed resistance to it and were immune already. The bacteria can reproduce every 20 minutes, and we can't. Result mutate. It's an arms race between the antibiotics we can use and the way that the bacteria can mutate around it. They can also swap genes promiscuously, so that if one strain becomes resistant, others can. If we have another plague, especially if it's viral, because we have even fewer antivirals, like the flu in 1918, we're not ready. We're not prepared. Everybody got very upset about Ebola, which is a horrific disease, but diseases like Ebola are not the big problem because they're not airborne. They're more easy to contain, and they're harder to contract, even if it had gotten into a city, which fortunately it didn't. Flu, on the other hand, or anything that can ride on the air, is a potential real danger, and this does worry me. Also, of course, you really are getting to be very pessimistic here, but this is what's on my mind. Also, of course, microbes can be weaponized, deliberately made airborne and genetically engineered to be dangerous, and used as weapons of mass destruction. I've written 2 bio-thrillers on this, Oaths and Miracles and Stinger, and they're 2 of my favorite of my own books.
Right. Thank you. Um, let's lighten it up a little bit. What
Yes, let's.
what does make Cosette the world's most spoiled toy poodle?
Oh, my dog is such a princess, it's ridiculous. There are days that I feel that my main function in life is to be a doorman for a dog. She wants to go out, she wants to come in, she wants to go out, she wants to come in. She wants to be petted, she climbs up into my lap while I'm trying to work. And it's the same with my husband. Both of us are just slaves to this dog. She gets through life by being lethally cute, which she really is. Do you have a picture of her?
I think I've seen one of her on Twitter on the beach. Um,
Yes. Yeah. We just came back from 3 days on the Oregon coast and dog. And we thought, oh, this will be great. She can run around off leash. Well, she can't because the first thing she did was roll in a dead seagull.
oh,
So no more being off leash. But yeah, we're both slaves to the dog.
very cool. That's yes. We have dogs and cats, and that seems to be how it works. At Confuse 93, you gave a talk on sort of the state of women writers in science fiction then. In the intervening years, how do you think things have changed, or have things changed?
You know, this is a thorny question. I don't really know. I have women friends who are convinced that if they submitted their books under male names, they would get more publishing attention, more sales offers, more sales. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. I don't know if I would have had more if I had used a name like Morgan or Terry that was unisex. Because how can you go back and test that? I suppose I could submit something blind with a different name on it that was unisex now, but then I wouldn't have the followers that I already have, so that wouldn't be a fair test either. I really don't know. I do know that we need more girls in science and math because that's girls that are interested in science and math are often interested in science fiction, which is why I think the series that you are doing is just wonderful. I wish there had been something available like that when I was a kid. I grew up in the 1950s, and this is hard to believe today. The library had a girls section and a boys section, and all the science fiction was in the boys section. I never saw any science fiction until I was 14 years old.
And growing up in the 70s, it was a lot different. I mean, we had Star Wars and Battle of the Planets and all that sort of stuff coming up, but it was still very gender roles. Luke went off and had the adventure, and Leia far too often waited to get rescued. I mean, there was so much of that kind of dynamic in a lot of it. So it's nice to see some of that starting to change. And I think it is that we have more women writers and film producers and more women in the sciences.
Yes, we do. And it's partly due in science fiction to the first wave of female SF writers that came in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. By the time I was publishing, they had already broken a lot of the barriers, and that made a big difference. But we still don't have as many women in science as we need. I lectured to an engineering class at the University of Washington just 2 weeks ago, and there were 25 people in it, of which two were girls.
Yep. Well, it is something that honestly I think the whole country is starting to realize that we've got a problem here. That if we aren't encouraging half our population to play to their actual strengths, we're weaker.
They're in medical school now. There's more than half of the graduates from medical school are female. They're in law school. But somehow engineering and biology and especially physics, we're just falling behind.
Yeah.
By we, I mean females.
Yes. Um. doo-doo-doo. What other writers do you enjoy reading in SF or beyond?
Writers?
Hmm. Other
Well,
authors.
my favorite writer of all time is not a science fiction writer. It's Jane Austen. I did my graduate work on Jane Austen, and I still reread all six novels every couple of years. I think she's wonderful. But I do read a lot of material that isn't science fiction, both nonfiction and fiction. Right now, I just finished John Ronson's book on shaming on social media. So you've been publicly
Mm,
shamed, which
yes.
is an extremely interesting book covering some famous examples of public shaming as well as some more obscure ones. And what he goes into why we might be doing this, what are the consequences, what are the societal explanations. It was really an interesting book. In genre, there are a lot of writers that I enjoy, but my all-time favorite is Ursula K. Le Guin, whom I think walks on water. When I read in 1969, The Left Hand of Darkness, I thought, oh my God, I didn't know this could be done.
She has managed to keep us all thinking for many years. No.
And more than thinking, she created characters that felt real. Shevik in The Dispossessed was the first science fiction character I ever came across that I could actually believe was as fully developed and as rounded and as complicated and as contradictory as the human beings that I was finding in mainstream literature. And I think that that's a goal many of us aspire to. We may fall short, but there she is, like a shining star to aspire to.
Right there. What do you wish people would ask you at interviews? You've done any number of these things. What do people always fail to get to?
I don't know. You've managed to hit a lot of it. You've managed to hit background, science, process, influences, my pessimistic side with microbes. So you've managed to hit a lot of it. I would like to say that I have a book coming out tomorrow,
Oh, good.
which I'm extremely proud of, which is The Best of Nancy Kress. It's from Subterranean Press, and it's 21 stories written over almost 40 years, and I got to choose which ones I wanted to put in there. So I'm extremely happy about this book. I want to get that little plug in.
Oh, definitely. And I've got to say, I've already got it on my Kindle. It must have come up live on Amazon yesterday because I
It
saw
did.
this
It
notice
came
and
up
I
in
hit
the
that
Kindle.
button.
They had some trouble with the hard copy. There was one illustration that wasn't printing correctly. So the hard copy is only shipped today. But the Kindle version was available, yes, as of September 1st. And thank you. I'm very pleased.
No, that was an easy decision. Um, so yes, we will definitely happy to get that word out there. So what are you working on next? If you're doing one at a time and that's just out.
Yes. Yesterday's Kin, which is a novella that won the Nebula this year, I'm turning into a novel.
Oh, good.
And it's under contract to Tor. So the novel version of it will be coming out eventually. And as with Beggars in Spain, the novella will form the first part, and then it will carry the story forward because there really is a lot more story here. Um, they in this they were working. The characters are working with aliens to develop vaccine treatments for a spore cloud, which is going to hit. It does hit Earth, but it hasn't hit the other planet yet. So the rest of the book will deal with what happens after it hits Earth. And the second book, this is a series, will be on the other planet, what happens after it hits that world.
So
So,
more of
yes.
your optimistic.
Oh, but this one is much more optimistic because this time they managed to solve the problem. Just because I'm concerned about microbes doesn't mean that I don't think we can solve it.
Well, I think that pretty much sums up what the list of questions that people sent in were. Um, Thank you so much for being an enthusiastic supporter of the project, for giving your
I
time
really am. I think this is so important. I wish it had existed when I was a girl. Are you going to be doing more of them, Corey? Is there going to be a whole series?
every year.
Oh, I want to write more stories about Nia. I
Oh,
want to
great.
keep on with her. So I hope that happens.
No, our plan is to do this every year. This is our ongoing sort of well into retirement project.
Good, good.
Thank you again, and have a great day.